Look at that filthy bum trying to sign up for SEAL training. What a joke!" Lieutenant Commander Hayes sneered to his colleague, watching the disheveled man in tattered clothes approach the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado. The homeless man, Marcus Reid, 42, kept his eyes forward, his focus unwavering despite the dismissive glances and barely concealed contempt. He was just another desperate vagrant to them, easily written off. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Reid found unusual comfort in the harsh simplicity of living on the streets of San Diego. For the past 3 years since returning from his final deployment and losing everything to PTSD and a bitter divorce, he'd wandered between shelters, beach encampments, and occasionally the Veterans Affairs Outreach Center. The streets had a rhythm, a code, and sometimes even a strange kind of freedom that helped quiet the noise in his head. He was a disciplined man, even in homelessness. His meager possessions were always meticulously organized in his weathered backpack. His daily routine, waking before dawn, performing punishing calisthenics at an abandoned playground, swimming brutal distances in the cold Pacific, remained unbroken regardless of weather or circumstance. He kept to himself, exchanging necessary but brief conversations with other homeless veterans, and rarely engaged unless engaged with first. He wore whatever clothing the shelters provided: faded cargo pants with frayed hems, layered t-shirts and flannel against the coastal chill, a tattered military surplus jacket with no insignia, and a sun-bleached baseball cap that shadowed his weathered face and haunted eyes. The Navy personnel around Coronado, gleaming in their pressed uniforms and polished boots, hardly registered him beyond occasional acts of charity or reports to shore patrol. To them, he was environmental noise, the homeless vet, a cautionary tale perhaps, but ultimately invisible. Some sailors were compassionate, offering food or directing him to services. Others maintained professional distance. A few, caught in their own insecurities or prejudices, made quiet jokes about another burnout who couldn't hack it in the real world. Marcus heard them sometimes, but he let it roll off him like the morning fog. He wasn't there for their validation or pity. He was there because the rhythmic crash of the waves against the training beaches called to something deep within him, a purpose he'd lost, but couldn't quite forget. Few, if any, around the Naval Special Warfare Center knew that the calloused hands now collecting discarded cans for recycling had once assembled explosive charges under enemy fire, had controlled classified operations in contested territories, had gripped the shoulders of dying teammates while calling in medevac helicopters. Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Reid, retired, former senior enlisted leader of SEAL Team 6, recipient of the Navy Cross, Silver Star, and numerous other commendations, preferred anonymity. The accolades belonged to another life, another man who had believed in something greater than himself. Here, he was just Marcus, surviving one day at a time. The homeless existence had its own brutal training regimen, its own tests of endurance and will. The constant vigilance required to protect what little he had, the challenge of finding food and shelter in all weather, the psychological fortitude needed to endure public scorn or indifference. These were not unlike the challenges he had faced in Bud's training decades ago. Sometimes, in his clearer moments, Marcus recognized this parallel and found a grim satisfaction in it. He was still fighting, still enduring, even if the battlefield was now concrete underpasses and the enemy was his own damaged psyche. He maintained his physical conditioning with a zealot's dedication, not out of vanity, but necessity. The stronger his body remained, the more it helped anchor his fractured mind. Each morning began with hundreds of push-ups, pull-ups on playground equipment, and punishing runs along the beach, often drawing stares from actual SEAL candidates. Training nearby, who never imagined the homeless man was executing a program he himself had once designed for special operations. The ocean became his sanctuary. While tourists and locals enjoyed the picturesque beaches of Coronado for recreation, Marcus entered the water with monastic seriousness. He would swim for hours, battling currents and exhaustion, sometimes disappearing so far from shore that concerned citizens occasionally called Coast Guard. The salt water erased distinctions. In the embrace of the Pacific, he wasn't homeless, wasn't broken, wasn't lost. He was simply a man testing his limits against an implacable force. At night, when the demons came, memories of operations gone wrong, faces of men he'd failed to save, the look in his ex-wife's eyes when she said she no longer recognized the man she'd married, Marcus would stare at the stars above Coronado and recite the SEAL ethos to himself. The parts about never quitting, about persevering through adversity, had become a lifeline when all other meaning had slipped away. The incident that would shatter Marcus's invisible existence began, as such things often do, with an unexpected opportunity. A new program had been announced at the Naval Special Warfare Center, a research initiative studying performance metrics across different demographics, including veterans. They were soliciting volunteers to undergo modified BUD-S assessment tests, with modest compensation offered to participants. The data would help develop improved training protocols and perhaps identify overlooked potential in recruitment. Marcus learned about it through a VA counselor who had been trying, largely unsuccessfully, to engage him in rehabilitation programs. "They're paying $200 for a day of physical tests," the counselor explained, sliding the flyer across the desk. "It's not much, but it might help you get a room for a few weeks, maybe some new clothes for job interviews." The counselor's eyes held that familiar mix of hope and resignation that Marcus had grown accustomed to seeing, the look of someone who wanted to believe in his recovery, but had seen too many veterans cycle through the system to be truly optimistic. Marcus took the flyer without commitment. $200 was significant in his economy, enough for a cheap hotel room during the coming rainy season, enough to replace his disintegrating boots, enough to matter. The testing location, the Naval Special Warfare Center itself, gave him pause. He had deliberately avoided the facility since his return to San Diego, unwilling to confront the physical embodiment of his former life. But necessity has a way of overriding even the most entrenched avoidance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning of the assessment, Marcus arrived at the center looking particularly disheveled. He'd spent the night under a pier after a territorial dispute at his usual sleeping spot, and salt spray had stiffened his clothes and hair. The civilian research coordinator at the registration desk regarded him with poorly disguised apprehension. "Sir, are you here for the Veterans Assessment Program?" she asked, her hand hovering near the security phone. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice quiet but clear, devoid of the slur many associated with homeless individuals. He produced the crumpled flyer and his veteran's ID card, one of the few official documents he still possessed. The coordinator processed his paperwork with professional detachment, though her expression betrayed concern about his suitability for physical testing. "The assessment includes several strenuous elements," she explained carefully. "Participants need to be in adequate physical condition. There's a medical screening first." "I understand," Marcus said. He didn't elaborate or defend his fitness. Years of being underestimated had taught him the futility of explanations. It was during this exchange that Lieutenant Commander Hayes and several other officers noticed Marcus. Their reaction was immediate and predictable. "Are we really letting street people participate now?" Hayes asked loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "What's next? Recruiting from detox centers?" Probably just here for the stipend, another officer remarked. He'll wash out in the first 5 minutes. At least he'll get a shower out of it. Marcus absorbed their comments without visible reaction, a skill honed through years of both elite military training and street survival. The research coordinator, to her credit, flushed with embarrassment at her colleague's behavior. "Mr. Reid has qualified for the program, gentlemen," she said firmly. "We're assessing all veterans who meet the basic requirements. The medical screening should have been Marcus's first opportunity to surprise his detractors, but the young corpsman conducting the examination was too focused on his instruments to register the anomalies before him. The resting heart rate of an elite endurance athlete, the blood pressure of someone decades younger, the lung capacity that exceeded the testing equipment's upper limits. He simply recorded the numbers without comment and cleared Marcus for participation. The testing group consisted of 20 veterans of various ages, service backgrounds and fitness levels. They were led to the changing area and issued standard PT gear, navy blue shorts and gold t-shirts emblazoned with Navy across the chest. For many of the participants, it was a nostalgic moment, a temporary return to uniformity and purpose. For Marcus, changing clothes involved a more profound transformation. As he removed his layered street attire, glimpses of his true physical condition became visible to those nearby. The densely muscled torso covered in scars that told stories of combat and survival, the tribal-looking tattoo on his shoulder that, to knowledgeable eyes, identified him as a member of an elite unit. A former Marine in the changing room gave him a curious second glance, but said nothing. When the participants assembled on the beach for the first assessment, Marcus stood slightly apart, his posture subtly different, straighter, more controlled, radiating a quiet readiness that would have been immediately recognizable to any experienced operator. But the officers overseeing the tests saw only what they expected to see, a homeless veteran likely to provide a baseline for minimum performance. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, assigned to record metrics for the research team, didn't bother to hide his skepticism. "Let's see how our beach bum does with basic water confidence," he remarked to a colleague as the participants prepared for the first event, a timed 500-meter ocean swim. Marcus entered the water without hesitation, with none of the tentative adjustment to temperature that most participants displayed. His stroke was not the frantic crawl of someone desperate to finish, but the powerful, measured cadence of a man who had negotiated far more hostile waters under far more dangerous conditions. By the 250-meter mark, he had opened a substantial lead over the other participants. Hayes frowned at his stopwatch, then at the figure cutting efficiently through the waves. "He must have started early," he muttered. But the research assistant beside him shook her head. "No, sir, he started with the group." When Marcus completed the course, Hayes stared at the time in disbelief. It wasn't just good for a homeless veteran in his 40s, it was 2 minutes faster than the qualification standard for active duty. SEAL candidates, a time that would have been remarkable for an Olympic-caliber swimmer. "Equipment malfunction," Hayes declared, resetting his watch. "We'll get accurate times on the next event." But the next event, a maximum set of pull-ups, produced equally improbable results. While most participants managed between 8 and 15 repetitions, Marcus executed 63 with perfect form before the testing administrator called a halt, concerned about exceeding the study's protocols. By the third event, a timed run in deep sand, whispers were circulating among the testing staff. The homeless veteran was outperforming not just the other participants, but the comparative metrics from active duty special warfare candidates. Hayes's dismissive attitude had shifted to suspicious scrutiny. "He has to be on something," he insisted, ordering a spot urinalysis that wasn't part of the original protocol. "No way a street person performs at this level naturally." The drug test, hastily administered, came back negative for everything except elevated levels of natural endorphins. Marcus Reid was simply performing at an extraordinary level through natural ability and conditioning. The final scheduled assessment was a modified obstacle course used to evaluate prospective SEAL candidates. Most participants approached it with trepidation. It was designed to be intimidating, with elements that tested strength, agility, endurance, and courage. Several veterans opted out, unwilling to risk injury. Others attempted it with varying degrees of success. Marcus completed it with such fluid efficiency that several active duty instructors stopped their regular duties to watch. He navigated each obstacle with a familiarity that suggested intimate knowledge of its design and purpose, maintaining a pace that seemed impossible to sustain but never faltered. When he crossed the finish line, the atmosphere had changed completely. The dismissive smirks were gone, replaced by confused stares and hushed conversations. Hayes, now visibly unsettled, approached Marcus with forced casualness. "That was unexpected," he said, struggling to reconcile the performance he'd witnessed with his preconceptions. "Have you had previous military physical training beyond standard service?" Marcus met his gaze directly for the first time. "Some, sir," he replied, using the honorific automatically, a habit that registered with Hayes. "Where did you serve?" Hayes pressed, his earlier contempt now tinged with uncertainty. "Various places," Marcus answered vaguely. "Is the assessment complete? I'd like to collect the stipend if possible." Before Hayes could respond, a senior chief petty officer who had been observing the later events approached them. Unlike the officers, who saw only a homeless man who had improbably aced their tests, the senior chief had been watching Marcus with growing recognition. "Sir," he said to Hayes, "I need a word in private." He drew the lieutenant commander aside, speaking urgently in low tones while gesturing subtly toward Marcus. Hayes's expression cycled through disbelief, shock, and finally something approaching horror as the senior chief continued speaking. He looked back at Marcus, then at the senior chief, then nodded sharply and walked quickly toward the administration building. Marcus, sensing the change but unwilling to engage with it, approached the research coordinator about his payment. "I've completed all required elements," he said. "Is there anything else before I receive the stipend?" The coordinator, now regarding him with newfound respect, tinged with embarrassment, assured him the payment would be processed immediately. "The team would like to conduct some follow-up assessments if you're willing," she added, "with additional compensation, of course." Marcus declined politely but firmly. The walls of the training center were closing in, laden with memories he'd worked hard to keep at bay. He needed to leave before the past completely overwhelmed the careful numbness he'd constructed. He changed back into his street clothes quickly, no longer concerned with concealing his physical condition. As he was preparing to depart, a page came over the facility's announcement system. "Mr. Marcus Reid, please report to the commanding officer's office." Mr. Marcus Reid to the commanding officer. Marcus froze, one arm through the sleeve of his tattered jacket. He considered simply walking out. There was nothing legally compelling him to respond to the summons. But something deeper than obligation held him in place. A vestigial sense of duty, perhaps, or simply curiosity about how much they had discovered. The senior chief appeared at the locker room entrance. "Master Chief," he said quietly, using Marcus's former rank. "Captain's waiting, sir." The honorific "sir," directed from a senior chief to someone apparently homeless, confirmed what Marcus already suspected. They knew. Someone had recognized him, or his performance had triggered a personnel search. His carefully maintained anonymity was compromised. With reluctance born of both pride and pain, Marcus followed the senior chief through the facility. Every corridor held ghosts for him, younger versions of himself running drills, planning operations, mentoring trainees. By the time they reached the command suite, Marcus's jaw was clenched against a tide of unwelcome memories. Captain James Donnelly was relatively new to the command, having taken over the training center just 18 months earlier. He was known as a thoughtful, detail-oriented officer who prioritized both operational excellence and the welfare of his personnel. When Marcus was escorted into his office, Donnelly was standing behind his desk, staring at a computer screen with an intensity that suggested significant discovery. "Thank you for coming, Master Chief Reid," Donnelly said, using the rank deliberately. "Please, sit down." Marcus remained standing, his posture automatically shifting to the position of parade rest. "I prefer to stand, sir," he replied, the military courtesy emerging unbidden after years of disuse. Donnelly nodded, studying him with undisguised interest. "Do you know why I asked to see you?" "I believe someone recognized me, sir." "In a manner of speaking," Donnelly confirmed. "Your performance metrics today triggered some flags in our system. They matched almost exactly to a set of records we keep as benchmarks, the highest scores ever recorded in our assessment history." He turned the computer screen to face Marcus, displaying performance charts where today's results overlaid perfectly with historical data points. "These are your own records from 20 years ago, aren't they? From when you were an instructor?" "Here?" Marcus didn't answer directly. "The research team offered compensation for participation. I participated. If there's a problem with my eligibility for the program, I'll return the stipend." "That's not why you're here," Donnelly said, his tone softening. "Master Chief Reid, your service record is extraordinary. Your disappearance from the community 3 years ago was considered a significant loss. And now I find you living homeless outside my base, breaking records set by men half your age, and trying to walk away with $200 like none of it matters." Marcus's jaw tightened. The careful barriers he'd constructed between his past and present were crumbling. "With respect, Captain, my current circumstances are my own business." "Ordinarily, I'd agree," Donnelly replied, closing the personnel file on his screen. "But when a decorated special warfare operator, someone with your particular history, appears at my facility in this condition, it becomes my concern." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Not just as a commanding officer, but as someone who's responsible for the welfare of the Naval Special Warfare community, past and present." Marcus remained silent, his weathered face impassive. The disciplined stillness that had once made him an exceptional operator now served as a shield against unwanted scrutiny. Captain Donnelly studied him for a long moment before continuing. 3 years ago, after your medical retirement, you effectively vanished. Your pension checks went unclaimed. Your decorations ceremony was cancelled when you couldn't be located. Your former teammates have been looking for you." He gestured to a chair again. "I'd like to understand what happened, Master Chief." "There's nothing to understand, sir," Marcus finally responded, his voice low but steady. "I served. I retired. What came after is my own affair." The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Lieutenant Commander Hayes entered. Without waiting for acknowledgement, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. "Captain, I've confirmed—" He stopped abruptly when he saw Marcus, recognition and discomfort crossing his features. "Sir, I didn't realize. You were in a meeting." "Not a meeting, Commander. A long overdue conversation," Donnelly replied evenly. "I believe you've already met Master Chief Petty Officer Reid today, though perhaps not properly." Hayes's complexion paled as the implications of the rank and the captain's tone registered. "Master Chief Reid," he repeated, the name clearly connecting to information he'd recently discovered. We had no idea who—" he faltered. "Who you were mocking," Donnelly finished bluntly. "Yes, that's become apparent." Lieutenant Commander Hayes, you're dismissed for now. We'll discuss appropriate professional conduct regarding veterans later. After Hayes's hasty departure, Donnelly turned back to Marcus. That man and several others on my base treated you with contempt today because they saw only what they expected to see. A homeless veteran, someone they presumed had failed. What they didn't see was the man who revolutionized maritime counter-terrorism tactics, who led one of the most successful special operations units in naval history, who saved 27 hostages in the Malacca Strait crisis. That man doesn't exist anymore, Marcus said flatly. Evidence suggests otherwise, Donnelly countered, gesturing toward the performance metrics still displayed on his screen. A man doesn't maintain that level of physical proficiency while living on the streets unless something is driving him, something that matters. The captain's penetrating observation struck uncomfortably close to the truth. Marcus had maintained his punishing physical regimen not just for survival, but because it was the last thread connecting him to a life that had once had purpose. Each pre-dawn workout, each punishing ocean swim was a ritual affirmation that some part of him, the disciplined operator, if not the confident leader, still existed. "What do you want from me, Captain?" Marcus asked directly, fatigue creeping into his voice. "Initially, to offer you the respect you deserve and the assistance you've earned," Donnelly replied. "Beyond that, I have a proposal that might interest you. But first I'd like to understand how a man with your record ended up in these circumstances." The directness of the question, delivered without judgment, punctured something in Marcus's carefully maintained composure. Perhaps it was the familiar environment or the weight of carrying his secrets alone for so long, but he found himself speaking about the events he'd shared with no one. "My last deployment was to Somalia," he began, his gaze fixed on the navel. Flags behind Donnelly's desk. High-value target extraction under non-permissive conditions. We had solid intelligence, experienced operators, and a clear operational plan. Everything indicated a textbook mission. His voice remained clinical, detached, as if briefing an after-action report. We inserted at 0200 under favorable conditions. The target building was secured according to protocol. The primary package, a deep cover intelligence officer who'd been compromised, was recovered alive. Extraction was proceeding on schedule when we encountered an unexpected element. Marcus paused, the memories he'd suppressed for years now surfacing with cinematic clarity. A secondary group of civilians was discovered in a concealed room, a woman and 4 children being held as leverage against our intelligence officer. They weren't in the briefing, weren't part of the operational parameters. Donnelly nodded, understanding the impossible complication this represented. Special operations missions were planned with precision. Every additional person changed weight calculations, extraction timing, and risk profiles. "I made the call to extract all of them," Marcus continued. "Modified the plan on site to accommodate the additional packages. We were 30 seconds from primary extraction when the ambush hit." His hands, which had been perfectly steady throughout the physical trials, now showed a slight tremor. We were channeled into a prepared kill zone. Professional operation, likely based on intelligence from within our own planning chain. They knew exactly where to hit us and when. The office seemed to fade around him as Marcus continued, his voice growing increasingly distant. "Lost 2 operators in the first volley. Evac helicopter took critical damage but remained operational. I had wounded operators, the primary intelligence officer, and 5 civilian packages to extract with compromised transport and an active shooter scenario." Donnelly remained silent, recognizing that Marcus was no longer speaking to him, but working through a narrative he'd contained for too long. "Made the call to split the team. I took point on diversionary action with 3 operators while the Remaining team secured the packages for extraction, textbook tactical response to the situation. Marcus's breathing had shallowed, his pupils dilated as he relived the scenario. The diversionary element succeeded, drew enemy fire, created the necessary window for the extraction team. The helicopter departed with all packages secured. He fell silent, his gaze now focused on something Donnelly couldn't see. "And the diversionary team?" the captain asked gently, though he suspected he knew the answer. "2 KIA immediately. Myself and Chief Perkins established defensive position in an abandoned structure. Maintained communication with command while evading hostile forces for 27 hours. Perkins sustained an arterial wound during the second night. I applied field treatment, but without medical evacuation." Marcus swallowed hard. He didn't make the extraction window. The stark, clinical language couldn't disguise the devastation beneath. Marcus had led men who trusted him into a situation that claimed their lives, had watched a teammate bleed out while awaiting a rescue that came too late. "The mission was classified as a successful extraction," Donnelly noted quietly. "All primary and secondary packages secured. Intelligence objectives achieved." "Yes, sir. Operational success," Marcus confirmed, a bitter edge entering his voice. "I received a commendation for exceptional leadership under extreme duress." His expression hardened. "They gave me a medal for losing 3 men under my command." Donnelly understood now. The mission had been classified a success by objective parameters, but for a leader like Marcus, no strategic objective could outweigh the loss of men who trusted him with their lives. It was the unbearable paradox of command. Decisions that served the mission often came at a devastating personal cost. "What happened after you returned stateside?" he asked. "Standard protocol, medical evaluation, psychological assessment, debriefing. I was diagnosed with severe PTSD, recommended for medical retirement." Marcus's tone had returned to its detached quality. "My marriage, which had been struggling under the weight of deployments, couldn't survive the man who came home. My wife said she didn't recognize me anymore. After 20 years of service, I didn't recognize myself either." The narrative explained much about Marcus's current state, but not everything. Many veterans suffered similar traumas without ending up homeless. "You had resources," Donnelly observed. "Pension, benefits, support systems." "I didn't want them," Marcus said simply. "The pension felt like blood money. The support groups couldn't understand what I'd done, what I'd lost. The medications dulled everything. The pain, yes, but also the clarity, the responsibility. I stopped showing up for appointments, stopped cashing the checks. Eventually I just walked away." The streets of San Diego, with their anonymity and simplicity, had offered Marcus what nothing else could, a complete severance from the decisions and responsibilities that haunted him. Each day was reduced to basic survival. Each challenge, immediate and uncomplicated by moral ambiguity. No one depended on him. No one died because of his orders. The punishing physical regimen and exposure to the elements became a form of penance, a way to maintain the suffering he believed he deserved. "And your family?" Donnelly asked carefully. "Your wife? Your teammates?" "Better off without the reminder," Marcus answered with finality. Captain Donnelly absorbed the full weight of Marcus's story, recognizing both the trauma at its core and the distorted thinking it had produced. As a commanding officer, he'd seen the devastating impact of combat on even the most resilient operators. But he'd also witnessed remarkable recoveries when the right support systems and purposes were established. "Master Chief Reid," he began, his tone shifting from investigative to purposeful, "I appreciate your candor. What you've experienced would break most men. That you're still functioning at the level demonstrated today speaks to extraordinary resilience. Marcus received the observation without reaction. Survival wasn't an achievement to him, merely a default state. "I'm not going to insult you with platitudes about service and sacrifice," Donnelly continued, "but I will tell you that your current situation represents a significant loss, not just to you personally, but to the Naval Special Warfare community and the operators coming through this training center." He stood and moved to the window overlooking the training grounds, where SEAL candidates were conducting drills in the afternoon sun. "Those men out there are being trained according to protocols you helped develop. They're learning techniques you pioneered, but they're missing something crucial that no technical training can provide: the wisdom that comes from having faced the hardest decisions under the worst conditions." Turning back to Marcus, Donnelly laid out his proposal. "I'm offering you a position, Master Chief. Not charity, not a handout, but a job that only someone with your specific experience could perform." Marcus's expression remained skeptical, but Donnelly detected a flicker of interest, the first crack in his carefully maintained disengagement. "What position could possibly accommodate my current situation?" Marcus asked. "Performance Resilience Advisor," Donnelly replied. "A civilian role reporting directly to me, focused on developing psychological hardiness and ethical decision-making. In candidates, the position includes on-base housing, though that's optional." He let the offer settle before continuing. "The truth is, we're losing too many qualified candidates, not to physical failures, but to psychological ones. They have the strength, the stamina, the technical skills, but they break under the weight of impossible decisions. You've carried that weight. You've made those decisions. You've lived with the consequences. That experience, even the breaking, makes you uniquely qualified." Marcus's instinct was immediate rejection. The thought of returning to the world he'd abandoned, of facing daily reminders of his past, sent a wave of anxiety through him. Yet beneath that reactive response, something long dormant stirred, a sense of potential purpose. "I'm not the man." "You think I am, Captain," he said quietly. "The qualities that made me effective as an operator, the certainty, the confidence, those are gone." "Good," Donnelly replied, surprising him. "I don't need another confident instructor who's never faced true failure. I need someone who understands that leadership isn't about being infallible. It's about making the best possible decisions with limited information and living with the consequences, especially when they're devastating." The captain's words struck a chord that Marcus couldn't immediately dismiss. For 3 years, he'd been punishing himself for failures that any operator in his position might have experienced, holding himself to an impossible standard of perfect outcomes in imperfect situations. "These candidates need to understand that before they lead men into combat," Donnelly continued, pressing his advantage. "They need to hear it from someone who's been there, not from a textbook or a never-tested officer." Marcus remained silent, the internal conflict evident in his tense posture. "I'm not asking for an answer now," Donnelly said, recognizing the magnitude of what he was proposing. "The position will remain open for 30 days. In the meantime, I'd like to offer you temporary accommodations on base, access to medical services. If you want them, and a proper uniform allowance for the interim work I'm authorizing you to do." "Andre, what interim work?" Marcus asked warily. "An audit of our current training protocols for psychological resilience," Donnelly replied. "I want your unfiltered assessment of what we're doing right and what we're missing. No committees, no bureaucracy, just your direct observations and recommendations to me." It was a skillful approach, offering Marcus a limited, defined task that engaged his expertise without requiring a long-term commitment. The temporary nature made it easier to consider, less overwhelming than an immediate return to institutional life. "Why are you doing this, Captain?" Marcus asked directly. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Donnelly considered the question carefully before answering. 20 years ago, when I was a young officer facing my first combat deployment, a Master Chief pulled me aside after I'd made a serious tactical error in training. Instead of reporting me up the chain, he spent 3 hours breaking down not just what I'd done wrong, but how to make better decisions under pressure. That Master Chief probably saved my life and the lives of the men who would later serve under me. He met Marcus's gaze directly. I later learned he'd made a catastrophic error early in his own career, a decision that cost lives. He'd transformed that failure into a teaching tool, a way to prevent others from making similar mistakes. That's not charity, Master Chief Reid. That's the sacred obligation of those who've learned the hardest lessons to pass that knowledge on. The story resonated with Marcus more than he wanted to admit. Before the Somalia mission, he had taken similar approaches with junior operators, turning his own hard-earned lessons into guidance that kept others safe. That purpose, the tangible impact of preventing unnecessary losses, had been one of the most rewarding aspects of his service. "I'll consider the audit," he finally said, neither accepting nor rejecting the larger offer. "Temporary basis only." "That's all I'm asking for now," Donnelly agreed, recognizing the significance of even this limited engagement. "Senior Chief Ramirez will show you to temporary quarters and provide whatever you need." As Marcus prepared to leave, Donnelly added one final thought. "Those men you lost in Somalia, Master Chief, would they want you living under a pier or using what you learned from that night to save the next generation of operators?" The question hit Marcus with physical force, momentarily staggering him. In the 3 years since Somalia, he'd thought constantly about his fallen teammates, their faces, their voices, their trust in his leadership. But he'd never considered what they would want for him now. The possibility that they might find his self-imposed punishment wasteful rather than honorable had never entered his calculations. The incident that shattered Marcus's tenuous new arrangement began, as such things often do, with an unexpected collision between past and present. 3 days after accepting the temporary position, Marcus was reviewing training scenarios in the administrative building when Lieutenant Commander Hayes entered with several visiting officers from another command. Marcus had maintained a low profile during his initial days on base, working primarily from a small office Donnelly had assigned him and avoiding the more populated areas of the facility. He'd accepted the temporary quarters, but spent minimal time there, still uncomfortable, with comfort after years of hardship. His appearance had improved marginally. Clean-shaven, hair trimmed to regulation length, wearing simple khaki trousers and a navy polo shirt provided as part of his civilian contractor status. But he remained gaunt, weathered, his posture a complex mixture of military bearing and the protective guardedness developed on the streets. Hayes stopped abruptly when he saw Marcus, his expression cycling through recognition, embarrassment, and a defensive attempt at authority. The visiting officers, unaware of the tension, waited with professional patience. "Mr. Reid," Hayes said stiffly, using the civilian address, "I wasn't aware you were working in this section." "Performance assessment review, sir," Marcus replied, neutrally, using the military honorific not out of respect for Hayes personally, but from ingrained protocol. He gathered his materials, preparing to vacate the space and avoid unnecessary interaction. One of the visiting officers, a commander with the distinctive insignia of naval intelligence, studied Marcus with sudden interest. "Reid," he repeated. "Marcus Reid." Marcus froze, immediately recognizing the intelligence officer, though they hadn't met in nearly 4 years. Commander Elliot Chen had been the planning officer for the Somalia operation, the man who had provided the intelligence briefing that failed to identify the civilian hostages. "My God, it is you," Chen continued, his professional demeanor slipping. "We thought you were dead or overseas somewhere. There have been inquiries." "Commander," Hayes interrupted, sensing the sudden tension. "Perhaps we should continue the tour. Mr. Reid is a civilian contractor assisting with training assessments." Chen ignored him, his focus locked on Marcus. "The last time I saw you was at Landstuhl Medical after Somalia. You disappeared before the full debriefing could be completed." The casual reference to the operation, spoken in a public space, among officers with no need to know, breached both security protocols and a deeply personal boundary for Marcus. His expression hardened, the carefully maintained civilian demeanor falling away to reveal the operator beneath. "Commander Chen," he said, his voice dropping to a register that made the visiting officers instinctively straighten their posture. "That operation remains classified. This isn't the appropriate venue for discussion." Chen had the grace to look embarrassed, but pressed on with reduced volume. "I've been trying to contact you for years. There are developments regarding that situation. Information you should know." "I'm not interested," Marcus replied flatly, moving to leave. "It wasn't your fault," Chen said quickly, the words halting Marcus mid-step. "The intelligence failure wasn't random. We've spent 3 years investigating, and there's evidence the mission was compromised at the highest levels. The ambush was pre-planned, targeting your team specifically." Marcus stared at Chen, the implications of his statement detonating, like a depth charge in his consciousness. "What did you just say?" Hayes, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, attempted to intervene. "Gentlemen, this really isn't the place." "My office," Marcus cut him off, addressing Chen directly. "Now." Without waiting for acknowledgement, Marcus strode toward the small space Captain Donnelly had allocated him. Chen quickly excused himself from the tour group and followed, leaving Hayes sputtering ineffectually behind them. The office was little more than a repurposed storage room with a desk, chair, and secure computer terminal, but it offered what Marcus needed most: privacy. He closed the door firmly once Chen entered and faced the intelligence officer with barely contained intensity. "Explain," he demanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a senior operator accustomed to receiving clear, concise intelligence briefings. Commander Chen, though technically superior in rank, responded to the tone automatically. "After you left active service, discrepancies in the Somalia operation intelligence continued to surface. Small things at first. Inconsistencies in source reporting, unusual communication patterns prior to the mission, unexplained financial transactions linked to regional assets." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "I began an unofficial investigation, which eventually gained official sanction when patterns emerged connecting Somalia to 3 other compromised operations. 6 months ago, we identified a high-level security breach within naval intelligence itself." "Who?" Marcus asked, the single word carrying lethal intent. "Captain Vincent Mercer." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Mercer had been his commanding officer for 2 years before the Somalia operation, a highly respected intelligence officer who had personally selected Marcus's team for the mission. "That's not possible," Marcus stated flatly. "Mercer was a 20-year veteran with impeccable credentials. He had no motive, no connections to hostile actors. His financial motive became clear once we knew where to look," Chen explained. "Offshore accounts, shell companies, a sophisticated network of cutouts. As for connections," he hesitated, clearly weighing operational security against Marcus's need to know. He was compromised during an operation in Yemen in 2019, blackmailed, initially, then turned into a willing asset for a private military organization with ties to several hostile states. Marcus processed this information with the analytical precision that had once made him an exceptional operator. If Chen was right, if Mercer had deliberately compromised the Somalia mission, then the ambush that killed his men wasn't the result of Marcus's tactical decisions, but a predetermined outcome engineered by someone they all trusted. "Evidence?" he demanded. "Conclusive," Chen confirmed. "Digital, financial, testimonial." Mercer is currently in custody at a secure facility awaiting trial in a classified military court. But there's a problem. He leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the privacy of the office. Mercer is negotiating, offering information on other compromised operations and agents in exchange for considerations. His testimony on Somalia conflicts with the official record in significant ways. How so? He claims the mission was fundamentally different than what you were briefed, that the extraction of the intelligence officer was secondary to an undisclosed objective. Chen met Marcus's gaze directly. He says you were sent in not despite the likelihood of an ambush, but because of it. A calculated sacrifice to maintain his cover with the organization he was working for. The revelation struck at the core of everything Marcus had believed about the mission that destroyed his life. If Chen was right, his men hadn't died because of his decisions. They had died because they were deliberately sacrificed by their own command structure. "Why tell me this now?" Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because Mercer's plea deal hinges on his version of events being accepted as fact," Chen explained. "Without contradictory testimony from the ground commander, his narrative becomes the official record. He walks away with a reduced sentence, and the men who died under your command are officially recorded as acceptable losses in a sanctioned deception operation. The injustice of it, the final insult to the memories of the operators who had trusted him, ignited something in Marcus that 3 years of self-imposed penance had nearly extinguished. A sense of purpose, a reason to engage rather than withdraw, a responsibility that transcended his personal suffering. "When?" he asked simply. "The closed tribunal begins in 2 weeks, Chen replied. "Your testimony would need to be prepared immediately. It won't be easy. Mercer has powerful connections, and there are elements within the intelligence community who would prefer this entire affair remain buried." For the first time in 3 years, Marcus felt the familiar clarity of operational focus replacing the fog of grief and self-recrimination. This wasn't about his redemption or his suffering. This was about justice for the men who had followed him into that kill zone, believing they were serving their country rather than a traitor's agenda. "I need everything you have," he said, the decisive tone of a mission commander returning to his voice. "Intel reports, communication logs, after-action assessments, everything connected to Somalia and Mercer's other compromised operations." Chen nodded, relieved by Marcus's engagement. "I'll have it transferred to your secure terminal. Today, there's something else you should know." He hesitated, then continued with evident discomfort. "The primary package from the Somalia operation, the intelligence officer you extracted, has been asking about you consistently since her return. She says there are details about that night that only you would understand, information she couldn't include in her official debriefing." This unexpected connection to the past added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. Marcus remembered the intelligence officer only vaguely, a woman in her 30s, injured but composed during the chaotic extraction, insistent that the civilians found with her were more important than her own evacuation. Is she part of the investigation? Central to it, Chen confirmed. She was investigating Mercer's organization when her cover was compromised. That's why she was taken hostage, not for the intelligence value, but to silence her before she could report her findings. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture vastly different from the one Marcus had been carrying for 3 years. His men hadn't died because of his tactical errors or his hubris in expanding the mission parameters. They had died because they were sent into a trap by their own command, a trap triggered specifically because Marcus had made the moral choice to extract all hostages rather than abandoning the civilians. The realization didn't erase the pain of loss, but it fundamentally transformed its meaning. Their deaths weren't a testament to his failure as a leader, but to the integrity of the unit he had built. Operators who would risk everything to protect innocent lives, even when the mission parameters didn't explicitly require it. "I need to brief Captain Donnelly on this development," Marcus said, already moving toward action with a decisiveness that had been absent since his return from Somalia. "My current position here will need to be adjusted to accommodate this investigation." "Of course," Chen agreed, standing to leave. "I'll establish secure communications for our ongoing coordination. And Marcus," he added, dropping formal address, "thank you. I know this brings back everything you've been trying to escape, but without your testimony, those men died for nothing. With it, they died exposing a cancer within our own ranks." After Chen departed, Marcus remained motionless in his small office, absorbing the seismic implications of what he'd learned. For 3 years, he had carried the weight of those deaths as personal failures, evidence of his inadequacy as a leader, justification for his self-imposed exile from society. Now he was forced to consider another possibility, that his team had performed exactly as they should have, with courage and moral clarity, in a situation deliberately engineered to destroy them. The thought was simultaneously liberating and enraging. If his decisions on the ground hadn't caused those deaths, then his subsequent withdrawal from life, from responsibility, from purpose, from the community that needed his experience, wasn't penance but surrender. He had abandoned the living to mourn the dead, leaving unchallenged the very forces that had sacrificed his men. Captain Donnelly received the briefing on the Mercer investigation with grave concern, immediately grasping both the national security implications and the personal significance for Marcus. "You understand what this means for your position here," Donnelly said, after Marcus had outlined the situation and his need to participate in the tribunal. "Yes, sir. I'll need to withdraw from the training assessment project immediately." "That's not what I meant," Donnelly corrected. "This investigation represents exactly why I wanted you here in the first place. Our candidates need to understand the complex ethical terrain of modern special operations, including the reality that sometimes the threat comes from within the chain of command." He stood, decision made. "I'm expanding your role, effective immediately. You're now Special Advisor on Ethical Decision-Making and Resilience Training, with full authority to implement curriculum changes as needed. Your participation in the Mercer investigation becomes part of your official duties." The captain's decisive support, his unflinching recognition of the value Marcus still offered despite his damaged state, cracked another layer of the protective isolation Marcus had built around himself. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for that role, Captain," he admitted. "I've been living under peers, avoiding responsibility, punishing myself for failures that may not have been mine. That's not the profile of someone who should be shaping the next generation of operators." "I disagree," Donnelly said firmly. "You've experienced the darkest possible betrayal of trust, command sending you deliberately into a kill zone, and survived. You've confronted the ultimate ethical challenge, whether to prioritize mission parameters or innocent lives, and chose humanity over expediency. You've walked through hell and retained enough of your core values to re-engage when justice required. Identity. He locked eyes with Marcus. Those aren't disqualifications. They're exactly the qualifications these candidates need in a mentor. The next 2 weeks transformed Marcus in ways 3 years of self-imposed suffering never could. Given a purpose that transcended his personal pain, securing justice for his fallen teammates and protecting future operators from similar betrayals, he applied the formidable focus and discipline that had once made him an exceptional special operator to rebuilding himself. He moved into the on-base housing Donnelly had offered, though he maintained a Spartan existence that reflected his continuing discomfort with comfort. He accepted medical treatment for long-neglected physical issues, dental problems, nutritional deficiencies, an improperly healed fracture in his left foot. He began carefully controlled reintegration with the SEAL community, first meeting with senior instructors who remembered him from his active duty days, then gradually engaging with training cadre and support staff. The most challenging aspect of his re-emergence was confronting the mythology that had developed around his disappearance. In his absence, Marcus Reid had become something of a legend in Naval Special Warfare circles, the decorated team leader who had vanished after a classified operation, rumored to be everything from dead to conducting deep cover missions overseas. The reality that he had been living homeless within sight of the training facility was initially met with disbelief, then with a complex mixture of respect for his physical resilience and concern for the psychological burden that had driven him to such extremes. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, to his credit, made a sincere effort to correct his initial dismissive treatment. He approached Marcus 7 days into the preparation for the Mercer Tribunal, finding him analyzing intelligence reports in his expanded office. "Master Chief Reid," Hayes began formally, standing at a respectful distance, "I owe you an apology for my behavior during the assessment program and after. My comments were unprofessional and beneath the standard expected of a naval officer." Marcus studied him for a moment before responding. "Your reaction to a homeless veteran was common." "Enough, Commander. I've heard worse on the streets." "That doesn't make it acceptable," Hayes insisted. "I judged based on appearance rather than substance. Worse, I failed to recognize the basic dignity owed to any veteran, regardless of their circumstances." He straightened, meeting Marcus's gaze directly. "I've requested permission from Captain Donnelly to incorporate this incident into our leadership training as a case study in prejudice and professional failure. With your approval, of course." The request revealed genuine reflection rather than perfunctory damage control. Marcus recognized in Hayes something he had seen in promising junior officers during his active service: the capacity to acknowledge mistakes honestly and transform them into growth opportunities. "Permission granted," he replied simply. "But make it about more than just me. There are thousands of veterans living on the streets, Commander. Most of them don't break records or get recognized by base commanders. They deserve the same respect you're now offering me." As the tribunal date approached, Marcus's focus narrowed to the task of preparing his testimony. The evidence Chen provided painted a damning picture of Captain Mercer's betrayal. Years of selling operational intelligence, manipulating mission parameters to benefit his paymasters, sacrificing American operators and assets to maintain his cover and value. The Somalia operation represented Mercer's most egregious betrayal. Documents revealed that he had known about the civilian hostages from the beginning, had deliberately withheld that information to ensure Marcus's team would face unanticipated complications that would slow their extraction. He had personally selected Marcus's unit because of their reputation for ethical decision-making, correctly predicting that they would attempt to extract all hostages rather than abandoning the Civilians creating the delay necessary for the ambush to be executed. The night before Marcus was scheduled to depart for the closed tribunal in Washington, Captain Donnelly requested a private meeting. Marcus found him in his office, reviewing personnel files with the focused attention he brought to all aspects of command. "You're ready for tomorrow?" Donnelly asked without preamble. "As ready as possible, sir," Marcus confirmed. "Commander Chen has prepared me for the likely procedural challenges Mercer's defense will raise." Good. Donnelly closed the file he'd been reviewing. "There's another matter I wanted to discuss before you leave. A decision regarding your long-term position here." Despite the significant progress Marcus had made in re-engaging with professional responsibilities, he still maintained a careful emotional distance from any permanent commitment. The temporary nature of his current role, focused specifically on the Mercer investigation, allowed him to function without confronting the deeper question of his place in the world going forward. "I've reviewed your preliminary recommendations for the resilience training program," Donnelly continued. "They represent a fundamental shift in how we prepare operators for the ethical challenges of modern warfare. I'd like to implement them fully, which would require your ongoing presence and authority." Marcus remained silent, his internal conflict evident in his carefully neutral expression. "I understand your hesitation," Donnelly acknowledged. "You've spent 3 years deliberately disconnected from this world. Recommitting represents a significant psychological step." "It's not just that, sir," Marcus finally responded. "I'm not convinced I'm the right example for these candidates. Yes, I maintained physical standards despite my circumstances. Yes, I'm contributing to the Mercer investigation, but I also abandoned my responsibilities, rejected help, chose suffering over service. That's not the model of resilience these young operators need." Donnelly considered this perspective thoughtfully before responding. "When I was a junior officer, my first commanding officer shared something I've never forgotten. He said, 'Perfect leaders don't create resilient teams. Imperfect leaders who acknowledge their struggles and keep moving forward do.'" He leaned forward, emphasizing his point. "These candidates don't need an invulnerable superhero as their model, Master Chief. They need a real human being who has faced genuine darkness, betrayal, loss, crushing self-doubt, and found a way to re-engage with purpose. Your journey isn't a disqualification. It's precisely what makes you invaluable." The wisdom in Donnelly's perspective penetrated Marcus's remaining defensive barriers. For 3 years, he had defined resilience as enduring suffering than overcoming it, measuring his worth by his capacity for self-punishment rather than his potential for continued contribution. But true resilience wasn't about how much pain you could endure. It was about how you transformed that pain into purpose. "I'll consider the permanent position after the tribunal, sir," Marcus finally said, not fully committing but no longer reflexively rejecting the possibility. "That's all I ask," Donnelly replied, satisfied with this incremental progress. "One more thing before you go." He slid a folder across the desk. "I took the liberty of arranging a meeting for you in Washington after your testimony concludes. Someone who's been asking to speak with you since her extraction from Somalia." Marcus opened the folder to find a brief personnel summary for Commander Sarah Reeves, the intelligence officer his team had rescued 3 years earlier. The woman whose extraction had cost 3 of his men their lives, or so he had believed, until learning of Mercer's betrayal. "She's been persistent," Donnelly added. "Says there are aspects of that operation that only you would understand. Given what we now know about Mercer's involvement, I thought you might want to hear her perspective." The tribunal itself was a stark, clinical affair. A secure room in a nondescript government building, 3 senior officers serving as judges, a handful of intelligence officials, and legal representatives in attendance. Captain Vincent Mercer sat at the defense table, his once commanding presence diminished by confinement, but his eyes still calculating, assessing threats and opportunities even in his compromised position. When Marcus entered, Mercer's expression flickered with momentary surprise before settling into a mask of professional neutrality. It was the face Marcus remembered from countless mission briefings, confident, authoritative, utterly convincing in its projection of competence and integrity. Knowing what he now did about Mercer's treachery, Marcus marveled at his former commander's capacity for deception. The proceedings began with formal charges: espionage, betrayal of operational security, indirect responsibility for the deaths of American personnel. Mercer's defense strategy quickly became clear. He acknowledged selling certain intelligence to private military contractors, but maintained that the Somalia operation had been a sanctioned deception mission, designed from the beginning as a limited sacrifice to protect more valuable intelligence assets. When Marcus was called to testify, he approached the witness position with the calm precision that had once characterized his operational demeanor. He answered questions factually, referring to documented evidence rather than personal recollections wherever possible. He described the operational parameters as they had been presented to his team: the discovery of the civilian hostages, the tactical decisions made during the extraction, and the ambush that claimed his men. Mercer's defense counsel attempted to undermine his testimony by highlighting his post-service instability, his disappearance from official records, his homeless status, his failure to participate in previous investigations. Each attack was delivered with calculated compassion, suggesting that trauma had compromised Marcus's reliability as a witness. "Master Chief Reid," the defense counsel said with practiced sympathy, "your service record is exemplary, and the tribunal acknowledges the severe trauma you experienced during and after the Somalia operation. But given your subsequent psychological challenges, as evidenced by your extended period of homelessness and disconnection from support systems, isn't it possible that your recollection of the operational parameters differs from the actual classified directives Captain Mercer was operating under?" The question was skillfully framed to seem reasonable while undermining the foundation of Marcus's testimony. 3 weeks earlier, it might have triggered self-doubt or defensive withdrawal. But the man who sat in the witness position now was not the isolated, self-punishing figure who had been living under San Diego piers. This was Marcus Reid, reconnected to his core identity, the clear-eyed operator who had led men through the most challenging conditions imaginable, who had made life-or-death decisions based on moral principles rather than expediency. "My housing status has no bearing on my factual testimony," he replied evenly. "The operational directives provided to my team are documented in the mission, briefing materials submitted as evidence. If Captain Mercer had classified directives beyond those provided to the ground team, that would constitute a deliberate endangerment of personnel, a violation of operational protocols that supports the prosecution's case rather than the defense's." The methodical dismantling of the defense's strategy continued as Marcus referenced specific documents, communications logs, and after-action reports that contradicted Mercer's claim of a sanctioned deception operation. By the time his testimony concluded, the narrative of the Somalia mission had been fundamentally reframed, not as a tragic operational failure or a necessary sacrifice, but as a deliberate betrayal by a trusted commander. As Marcus was dismissed from the witness stand, he passed close to Mercer's position. The former captain spoke quietly, for Marcus's ears alone. "You should have stayed under your peer, Master Chief. Some battles aren't worth fighting." Marcus paused, studying the man who had sent his teammates to their deaths. "That's where you're wrong, Captain," he replied, equally quiet but unflinching. "Some battles define who we are, especially the ones that seem unwinnable. The meeting with Commander Sarah Reeves took place in a secure conference room within the same facility. Marcus entered with professional caution, unsure what to expect from this connection to the operation that had shattered his life. The woman who rose to greet him bore little resemblance to the injured hostage his team had extracted 3 years earlier. Then she'd been physically diminished by captivity, her manner necessarily guarded even during rescue. Now she stood straight and confident, her eyes clear and focused, her handshake firm. "Master Chief Reid," she said with evident emotion, "I've been trying to find you for 3 years. I wasn't ready to be found," Marcus replied simply, taking a seat across from her. Commander Reeves studied him with an intelligence officer's trained observation. "That's become apparent. Your disappearance was thorough. Even with intelligence resources, we couldn't locate you until you appeared at the SEAL assessment program." "We?" Marcus questioned, his operational instincts automatically noting the plural. "Myself and the others you saved that night," she clarified, "the woman and children from the secondary room." This unexpected connection to the civilians from the Somalia operation caught Marcus off guard. In the chaos of the extraction and its aftermath, he had never learned what happened to them, had assumed they were processed through standard protocols for civilian rescues in conflict zones and eventually repatriated. "They survived?" he asked, a hint of genuine emotion breaking through his professional demeanor. "They did more than survive, Master Chief," Reeves replied. She removed a slim folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. "Amal Hadid. And her children were not random hostages. They were the family of one of our most valuable intelligence assets in the region, a man who had been providing critical information on terrorist financing networks at tremendous personal risk." Marcus opened the folder to find photographs and brief biographical information on a woman in her 30s and 4 children ranging from approximately 5 to 15 years of age. Their faces, captured in official documentation, showed the strain of their ordeal, but also a fundamental resilience. When their connection to our intelligence operations was discovered, they were taken hostage specifically to force their father to reveal other assets in the network, Reeves continued. "They were being held as leverage, both against him and against me, as I had been his primary handler. That's why they were kept in a separate room during my interrogation. The captors wanted to maintain the threat without allowing us to communicate." The revelation added yet another layer to Marcus's evolving understanding of the Somalia operation. The civilians hadn't been random complications. They had been integral to the intelligence situation, their safety as strategically important as Reeves's own extraction. "Mercer knew this," Reeves confirmed, anticipating his question. "It was in my initial capture report, which he personally reviewed. He deliberately omitted it from your mission briefing, knowing that discovering them would complicate your extraction timeline." Marcus absorbed this information with the same disciplined control he had maintained throughout the tribunal. "What happened to them after extraction? Where are they now?" Reeves hesitated, weighing operational security against Marcus's evident need for closure. "They were resettled in the United States under new identities. The father was extracted in a separate operation and joined them. They've been under our protection program since then." She reached into her briefcase again and withdrew a sealed envelope. "Amal asked me to give you this if I ever found you. I've kept it with me for 3 years, through dozens of operations and investigations, waiting for this moment." Marcus accepted the envelope with careful hands, a tangible connection to the night that had defined the last 3 years of his life. The envelope was addressed simply to "the Master Chief who saved us," in careful, slightly uncertain English. "I'll leave you to read it privately," Reeves said, standing. "But before I go, there's something else you should know." Her professional demeanor softened slightly. The intelligence Amal's husband provided, combined with information I gathered during my captivity, has led to the dismantling of 3 major terrorist financing networks and the prevention of at least 7 planned attacks on U.S. interests. She met his gaze directly. The men you lost that night, Master Chief, their sacrifice protected not just the 7 lives you extracted, but potentially thousands more. I know that doesn't ease the loss, but it matters. It has always mattered. After Reeves departed, Marcus sat alone with the unopened letter, gathering the emotional resources to confront this unexpected connection to the past. Finally, with the same deliberate focus he had once applied to disarming explosive devices, he carefully opened the envelope. The letter inside was written in careful English, the script precise and deliberate. To the Master Chief who saved my children, they tell me you are called Reid. My English is not perfect, but I must try to say what is in my heart. When the bad men took us, I believed we would die there. When they separated me from my children, I prayed only that their deaths would be quick and without pain. I had no hope. Then, in the darkest hour, came American soldiers. You found my children when others might have left them. You protected them with your own body during the escape. My oldest son, Reid, tells me how you carried my youngest when she could not run fast enough, even though you were injured. We are safe now. My children go to school. My husband is with us. We have a new life because of your courage and your heart. I am told that some of your men did not return from saving us. I pray for them every day. In my faith, those who die saving innocent lives are granted the highest place in paradise. I believe they watch over us still. If Allah grants us to meet someday, I will thank you properly. Until then, know that 5 hearts beat because of you. 5 lives continue because you valued them. Whatever darkness you carry, remember this truth. You brought light into our world when there was only shadow. With eternal gratitude, Amal Hadid and family. The letter struck Marcus with a force no physical blow could match, a direct connection to the human impact of the mission that had haunted him for 3 years. He had spent countless nights reliving the tactical failures, the lost operators, the crushing weight of command decisions gone wrong. But he had never fully considered the lives saved, had never allowed himself to weigh the cost against the outcome. Amal's words created a bridge between the operation's devastating losses and its profound purpose. The mission hadn't been a meaningless sacrifice engineered by Mercer's treachery. It had been a genuine rescue with real human consequences. Children who now attended school, a family reunited, lives continuing with possibility rather than ending in captivity. This perspective didn't diminish the loss of his men or absolve Mercer's betrayal, but it transformed the meaning of their sacrifice from futile waste to purposeful protection. The operators who died that night hadn't lost their lives in a pointless tactical failure. They had given them in service of a fundamental human duty, protecting the innocent from harm. As Marcus carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope, he felt a shift in his internal landscape, not a dramatic revelation, but a quiet realignment, like a dislocated joint finally finding its proper position. The grief remained, as did the anger at Mercer's betrayal, but alongside these emotions emerged something he had not permitted himself in 3 years, a sense of purpose, fulfilled rather than abandoned. He returned to San Diego with this new perspective, still processing its implications for his future. Captain Donnelly met him at the airfield, his presence a statement of support that transcended military protocol. The tribunal results came through an hour ago, Donnelly informed him as they walked to the waiting vehicle. Mercer has been found guilty on all counts. No plea deal, no reduced sentence. He'll spend the rest of his life in a military prison. Good, Marcus replied simply. Justice for his fallen operators had been his primary motivation for engaging with the tribunal. Knowing it had been achieved brought a measure of peace he hadn't expected to find. How are you processing all this? Donnelly asked as they drove toward the base. The question wasn't casual. It reflected genuine concern for Marcus's psychological state after confronting the traumatic past he'd spent years avoiding. Marcus considered his response carefully. "I'm recalibrating," he finally said. "For 3 years, I've been carrying a specific understanding of what happened in Somalia and what it meant. Now I have a different perspective. It changes things." "Including your decision about the permanent position?" Donnelly inquired, maintaining his focus on the road to give Marcus space for his response. "I met the family we extracted," Marcus said instead of answering directly. "The woman and children from the secondary room. They're thriving now. The woman wrote me a letter thanking me for valuing their lives." He paused, finding the words for a realization still forming within him. "For 3 years, I've been punishing myself for the men we lost without allowing myself to acknowledge the lives we saved. I've focused exclusively on the cost, without considering the purpose." Donnelly nodded, understanding the significance of this shift. "That's a common pattern after traumatic losses in command. We become fixated on what went wrong rather than what went right. It's a form of survivor's guilt, feeling we don't deserve to recognize the successes when others paid the ultimate price for them." "The thing is," Marcus continued, his voice growing more certain, "I don't think my men would want to be remembered that way, as failures or victims. They were operators who understood the risks and believed in the mission. They died protecting innocent lives from genuine evil. That matters." They had reached the base gates, the familiar landscape of the training facility spreading before them. Marcus gazed at the compound, where he had broken physical records as a homeless veteran, where he had begun the journey back to purpose, where young men and women were preparing for the same challenging path he had once walked. "I'm accepting the permanent position," he said with quiet finality. "Those candidates deserve to understand both the costs and the purpose of the path they're choosing. I can teach them that now. Not as some untouchable hero, but as someone who's experienced the worst this life can offer and found reasons to continue serving anyway." Donnelly allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. "I was hoping you'd say that. There's something you should see." He diverted their route toward the main training area, where an unusual formation had gathered on the obstacle course field. As they approached, Marcus recognized the distinctive organization of a Bud S class in the early phases of training. Young candidates still learning the fundamentals of teamwork and endurance, their faces showing the strain of the grueling program, but also the determination that had brought them this far. Standing before them was Lieutenant Commander Hayes, now conducting himself with the professional bearing of an officer who had learned a valuable lesson in humility and respect. "What's happening here?" Marcus asked as they parked at a discreet distance. "Commander Hayes requested permission to incorporate your story into the ethical decision-making portion of the curriculum," Donnelly explained. "With appropriate security measures, of course. He's been briefing the candidates on the importance of seeing beyond appearances, of recognizing that sometimes the most valuable wisdom comes from unexpected sources." As they watched, Hayes called the class to attention and gestured toward their vehicle. "Candidates, we have a special guest today. Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Reid will be joining our training command as Special Advisor on Ethical Decision-Making and Resilience. Some of you may recognize him as the homeless veteran who broke every physical record in our assessment program 3 months ago. What you don't know, what I didn't know myself when I first encountered him, is that Master Chief Reid is one of the most decorated special operators in naval history." Marcus felt a momentary impulse to retreat from this public acknowledgement. to maintain the anonymity that had protected him for 3 years. But alongside that reflexive response came a newer, stronger commitment to transform his experiences, both the triumphs and the devastation, into guidance that might prepare these young candidates for the challenges ahead. With a deep breath, he exited the vehicle and approached the formation, his posture automatically shifting into the commanding presence of a senior operator. The candidates straightened instinctively, recognizing authentic authority even without knowing its source. Master Chief Reid faced circumstances most operators never encounter, Hayes continued as Marcus reached his position. Command betrayal, impossible tactical decisions, devastating losses. He experienced the darkest consequences of warfare, and for a time, he withdrew from the world to process that darkness. But he never stopped living the core values of our community. Never stopped. Pushing his physical limits, never abandoned the discipline that defines who we are. Hayes turned to Marcus with genuine respect. He's here today to share perspectives you won't find in any training manual. The real human cost of the path you've chosen, but also its profound purpose. I'll let him tell you in his own words. As Hayes stepped back, Marcus faced the formation of candidates directly. They were so young, so early in their journey, full of ambition and determination, but not yet tested by the true challenges of operational reality. Looking at their expectant faces, Marcus recognized an opportunity not just to warn them about potential darkness, but to illuminate the path through it. 3 months ago, I was living under a pier 1/2 mile from this training facility, he began, his voice steady and carrying. I had medals in a storage locker I never visited. I had a pension I never collected. I had a purpose I had abandoned because I couldn't reconcile the cost of service with its value. The candidates remained perfectly still, absorbing his words, with the focused attention of those recognizing authentic experience. I'm not here to glorify that choice or to present my journey as a model to follow, Marcus continued. I'm here because my experience, both the operational successes and the personal failures, offers lessons that might help you navigate challenges I wasn't prepared for. He paced slowly before the formation, making eye contact with individual candidates. This training will push you to your physical limits, and that's necessary. But the hardest tests won't come from instructors or obstacle courses. They'll come when you're facing impossible choices in hostile environments, when you're carrying responsibility for lives that depend on your decisions, when you're confronting ethical complexities that no manual can fully prepare you for. Marcus paused, allowing his words to settle. I withdrew from that responsibility when the weight became too heavy. I chose isolation over connection, suffering over service, punishment over purpose. It took an extraordinary sequence of events to show me that resilience isn't about enduring pain. It's about transforming it into something meaningful. The air around the formation seemed to still as Marcus approached his central message. The hardest lesson I've learned, the one I'm still learning, is that true strength isn't found in never breaking. It's found in how we rebuild ourselves when we do break. It's found in the courage to reconnect after isolation, to accept support after rejection, to find new purpose after devastating loss. A calm certainty had entered his voice, not the forced confidence of someone trying to inspire, but the authentic wisdom of someone sharing hard-earned truth. Some of you will face moments that break you. That's not failure. It's part of the journey of anyone who takes on the burdens we carry in this community. What matters is what you do next. Whether you withdraw, as I did, or whether you find the courage to transform that breaking point into a foundation for something stronger. Marcus concluded with a challenge that reflected his own evolving perspective. The toughest obstacle you'll face isn't out there, he said, gesturing toward the brutal training course that awaited them. It's the voice inside that tells you you're not worthy after you've failed, that you're defined by your worst moments rather than your continuing potential to serve. Conquering that obstacle, learning to move forward with purpose even after devastating setbacks, that's the true test of an operator. As he finished speaking, a profound silence held the training area. The candidates remained at attention, but their expressions had shifted from polite interest to deep engagement. They had expected a motivational speech from a decorated operator. They had received instead an unvarnished glimpse into the human reality behind the mythology, both the devastating costs and the transformative potential of the path they had chosen. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stepped forward to dismiss the formation, but before he could speak, one of the candidates raised his hand, a breach of protocol that reflected the impact of Marcus's words. "Sir," the young man addressed Marcus directly, "may I ask a question?" Hayes looked to Marcus, who nodded his permission. "Master Chief," the candidate continued, his voice earnest, "how do you know when it's time to seek help instead of trying to handle everything alone?" The question cut to the heart of military culture, the tension between self-reliance and the necessity of mutual support, between stoic endurance and healthy vulnerability. It was precisely the conversation Marcus had avoided for 3 years, the recognition he had denied himself while living on the streets. "When the mission becomes compromised," he answered, with the straightforward clarity of an operational directive. "If you were wounded physically in a way that jeopardized your team's effectiveness, you'd report it immediately, not to protect yourself, but to protect the mission and your teammates. Psychological and emotional wounds work the same way. They're not weaknesses to hide, they're tactical realities to address so you can continue to serve effectively." He scanned the formation, recognizing in their attentive faces the same dedication that had once defined his own approach to service. "The strongest operators I've known weren't those who never struggled. They were those who recognized their limitations and addressed them directly, who understood that seeking support isn't weakness, it's tactical awareness, who knew that true resilience is built through connection, not isolation." As the formation was dismissed and the candidates moved toward their next training evolution, several approached Marcus individually, their questions revealing a hunger for authentic guidance beyond the standard curriculum. He engaged with each one directly, offering neither false reassurance nor dramatized warnings, but the balanced perspective of someone who had experienced both the heights and depths of the special operations experience. Captain Donnelly, who had been observing from a respectful distance, joined Marcus as the last candidate departed. "That wasn't a standard motivational speech," he noted with approval. "They don't need motivation," Marcus replied, watching the young candidates attack their next challenge with renewed focus. "They need truth about the costs, the challenges, and the way forward when those costs become almost unbearable." "And the way forward?" Donnelly asked, genuinely curious about Marcus's evolving perspective. "What is it in your experience?" Marcus considered the question carefully, thinking of the letter from Amal Hadid, of the lives his team had saved even amid devastating loss, of the candidates now preparing to face similar challenges and choices. "Purpose beyond self," he finally answered. "Understanding that our hardest experiences, even our failures, can become sources of guidance for others facing similar challenges. That's the way forward I missed for 3 years. I thought I was honoring my fallen teammates through isolation and suffering, but the true honor would have been transforming our shared experience into protection for the next generation." He gestured toward the training course, where candidates were navigating obstacles with determined focus. These young operators deserve leaders who understand both strength and vulnerability, who can guide them through not just tactical challenges, but the profound human costs of the work we do. That's a purpose worth recommitting to, not despite my broken places, but because of them. As they walked back toward the command buildings, Marcus felt a sense of alignment he hadn't experienced since before Somalia. Not the confident certainty of his earlier career, but a more nuanced integration of both his capabilities and his limitations, his achievements and his failures, his past suffering and his future purpose. The impact of Marcus's return to purpose extended far beyond his formal role at the training command. Word of his story spread through the special operations community, not as rumor or legend, but as a powerful example of resilience defined not by invulnerability, but by the capacity to rebuild after devastating setbacks. 6 months after accepting the permanent position, Marcus introduced a fundamental innovation to the SEAL training program, the Resilience Through Adversity module, which paired candidates with veterans who had faced significant challenges both in operations and in their return to civilian life. These weren't just decorated heroes with impressive records. They were complex human beings who had encountered the darkest aspects of service and found ways to integrate those experiences into lives of continuing purpose. The program quickly gained recognition beyond the Naval Special Warfare community, drawing interest from other military branches and eventually civilian crisis response organizations. Its core insight that authentic resilience comes not from avoiding breakdown, but from transforming it into wisdom, offered a powerful alternative to traditional models of toughness that often led to isolation and suffering similar to what Marcus had experienced. A year after his return, Marcus received an unexpected invitation, a small, private gathering organized by Commander Reeves to reunite him with the Hadid family. The meeting took place in a secure location, respecting the family's protected status while creating space for a connection that transcended operational parameters. Amal Hadid embraced him with the dignified gratitude of someone whose life had been irrevocably altered by his actions. Her children, now thriving in American schools, their English fluent, their futures full of possibility, regarded him with a mixture of awe and genuine affection. The youngest, whom Marcus had carried during the chaotic extraction, presented him with a carefully drawn picture of a strong man protecting a small child, a pure expression of how his actions had shaped her understanding of courage and care. As Marcus looked at these lives that continued because of decisions made in the most challenging circumstances imaginable, he recognized a truth that had eluded him during his years of self-imposed exile. Purpose is found not in personal achievement, or even personal redemption, but in the impact we have on others, the lives protected, the potential preserved, the wisdom shared when it matters most. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, who had transformed his initial failure of judgment into a genuine commitment to ethical leadership, approached Marcus one afternoon as he was concluding a training session with a particularly challenging class. "Master, Chief," Hayes began with the respectful directness that now characterized their professional relationship, "the Admiral is visiting next week to review the Resilience Through Adversity program. He's specifically interested in your perspective on implementing similar approaches across naval special warfare." Marcus nodded, accepting the information while recognizing its significance. His individual journey, from decorated operator to homeless veteran to resilience instructor, had evolved into something with potential impact far beyond his personal redemption. "There's something else," Hayes added with unusual hesitation. "The candidates from Class 347, your first group, are completing their final qualifications next month. They've requested that you present their tridents at the ceremony." The request represented a profound honor, an acknowledgement that Marcus had become not just an instructor, but a foundational influence on these new operators' understanding of their profession and its deeper purpose. "Tell them I'd be honored," Marcus replied simply. As Hayes departed, Marcus remained at the edge of the training ground, watching a new class of candidates navigating the obstacle course with determined focus. 3 years earlier, he had been living under a pier within sight of this facility, his extraordinary capabilities hidden beneath layers of grief and self-punishment. His potential contribution to these young operators left unrealized. The transformation from that isolation to his current purpose hadn't followed a heroic narrative of triumphant return. It had been messy, painful, filled with reluctance and setbacks, but that very messiness made it authentic, a genuine example of resilience, not as an idealized concept, but as a lived reality. A senior instructor approached, interrupting his reflection. "Sorry to disturb you, Master Chief, but there's a situation with one of the candidates that might benefit from your particular experience." Marcus nodded, immediately refocusing on the present need. "Lead the way." As he followed the instructor toward a young candidate struggling with the psychological aftermath of a near-drowning experience, Marcus moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had found his true purpose, not despite his broken places, but because of them. The darkness he had carried for so long had been transformed not into absence, but into illumination, a light that could guide others through their own challenges precisely because it had emerged from genuine shadow. The homeless veteran, who had once been mocked for attempting SEAL assessment tests, had indeed broken every record, not just the physical benchmarks measured by stopwatches and repetitions, but the more profound metrics of human resilience, of purpose reclaimed from devastation, of wisdom extracted from suffering and offered as protection to those who would follow the same demanding path. It wasn't the journey he had envisioned when he first entered service decades earlier. It was something more valuable, a demonstration that true strength lies not in never falling, but in how we rise, reconnect, and recommit to purposes greater than ourselves after our hardest falls. In that authentic resilience, Marcus had finally found the most meaningful mission of his exceptional career. The morning of the Trident ceremony dawned clear and bright, the San Diego sun casting long shadows across the parade ground where Class 347 would receive their hard-earned SEAL insignia. Marcus arrived early, his routine unchanged despite the significance of the day. Before dawn, he had completed his daily physical regimen, no longer a form of punishment, but a discipline that centered him in purpose and capability. As he stood at the edge of the ceremonial area, watching the preparations with a commander's practiced eye for detail, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The 18 months since his return to the training command had transformed not just his own life, but the very nature of resilience training within the special operations community. "Nervous?" Captain Donnelly asked, approaching from the command building. "Focused," Marcus corrected with the hint of a smile. Their relationship had evolved from tentative professional reconnection to genuine mutual respect, with Donnelly's initial faith in Marcus's potential having been validated many times over. "The Admiral arrived early," Donnelly informed him. "He wants to meet privately before the ceremony." Marcus nodded, suppressing the instinctive wariness that still surfaced occasionally when facing high-ranking officers. His experiences with Mercer had left scars that, while no longer debilitating, remained sensitive, a vigilance that perhaps served him well in his current role. Admiral James Harrington waited in Donnelly's office, his four-star insignia incongruous, in the relatively modest surroundings of the training command. Unlike many officers of his rank, Harrington had maintained a quiet humility throughout his ascension, a quality that had earned him genuine respect rather than mere deference from the operators under his ultimate command. "Master Chief Reid," the Admiral greeted him, extending his hand. "It's good to finally meet you in person. Your reputation precedes you." "Which one, sir?" Marcus asked with characteristic directness, accepting the handshake. "Harrington's." Eyes crinkled with appreciation for the candor. "All of them, I suppose." The decorated team leader, the homeless veteran who broke records, and now the architect of what many are calling the most significant innovation in special warfare training in a generation. The Resilience Through Adversity program isn't my creation alone, sir, Marcus clarified. It's built on the experiences of dozens of operators and the wisdom of mental health professionals who've specialized in combat trauma. But it required someone with your particular journey to catalyze it, Harrington observed astutely. Someone who had experienced both the heights of operational success and the depths of post-service struggle, and found a path that integrated both. The Admiral gestured for Marcus to sit, taking a chair himself rather than positioning behind Donnelly's desk, a subtle, equalizing gesture that reflected his leadership philosophy. "I've reviewed the program thoroughly," Harrington continued. "The data is compelling. Candidates who complete your module show significantly higher resilience metrics, better stress management, and, perhaps most importantly, increased willingness to seek appropriate support rather than suffering in isolation." Marcus nodded, familiar with the assessment results, but still processing their implications. What had begun as his personal redemption story had evolved into something with measurable impact on the next generation of operators. "What interests me most," the Admiral added, leaning forward slightly, "is the cultural shift your approach represents. For decades, we've equated toughness with stoic self-reliance, the ability to endure hardship without complaint. Your program introduces a more sophisticated understanding of resilience as a communal rather than individual quality." This articulation of the program's philosophy struck Marcus as unusually perceptive. Most senior officers recognize the practical benefits: reduced attrition, improved performance under stress, fewer post-deployment issues. But Harrington had identified the fundamental conceptual shift at its core. "That understanding came at significant personal cost, Admiral," Marcus acknowledged. "The most valuable insights usually do," Harrington replied. "Which brings me to the purpose of this conversation. The Secretary of the Navy has authorized the establishment of a new Joint Special Operations Resilience Command, a dedicated unit, focused on developing, implementing, and continually refining psychological and ethical preparation across all Special Operations forces." The Admiral paused, studying Marcus's reaction. "I'm here to offer you command of this new unit, Master Chief. Full operational authority, direct reporting line to my office, and the resources to expand your approach beyond this training facility to the entire Special Operations community." The offer momentarily stunned Marcus into silence. He had expected acknowledgement of the program's success, perhaps authorization to expand it incrementally, but not a jump to independent command, with direct access to four-star leadership. "With respect, sir, there are more qualified candidates," he finally responded. "Officers with command experience, PhDs in relevant fields, individuals without my complicated history. That complicated history is precisely what qualifies you," Harrington countered firmly. "This initiative isn't about academic theories or administrative efficiency. It's about fundamentally reimagining how we prepare operators for the psychological and ethical challenges of modern warfare, and how we support them through the inevitable impact of those challenges." The Admiral's gaze was steady, evaluating, but not pressuring. "You've lived both the triumph and the devastation of special operations, Master Chief. You've experienced the system's failures from the inside. And most importantly, you've demonstrated the capacity to transform those experiences into protection for others. That's the leadership this command requires." Marcus absorbed the magnitude of what was being proposed. Not just personal rehabilitation, or localized impact, but the opportunity to fundamentally influence how an entire community understood and practiced resilience. The responsibility was enormous, as was the potential for meaningful change. "I'll need operational autonomy," he said after careful consideration, neither accepting nor declining, but exploring the parameters. "This can't succeed as a top-down mandate. It has to be built from the ground up, with buy-in from operators at all levels." "Agreed," Harrington replied without hesitation. "You'll have full authority to design the command structure and implementation strategy. My office will provide resources and institutional support, but the operational approach will be yours to determine." "And my team," Marcus continued, already mentally assembling the combination of talents such an initiative would require. "Your selection without restriction," the Admiral confirmed. "If you want operators who've struggled, academics who've never seen combat, civilian specialists with no military background, whatever combination you believe will be effective, you'll have the authority to assemble it." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, exploring practical details and potential challenges. Throughout, Harrington demonstrated both genuine understanding of the concept and authentic commitment to its success, qualities that gradually overcame Marcus's initial skepticism. "The ceremony begins in an hour," the Admiral noted as their discussion concluded. "Take some time to consider the offer. We can reconvene tomorrow for your decision." "That won't be necessary, sir," Marcus replied with characteristic decisiveness. "I accept the command with the parameters we've discussed." Harrington's expression revealed genuine satisfaction. "Excellent. We'll formalize the appointment next week. For today, focus on the ceremony. These new operators deserve your full attention on their achievement." As the Admiral departed, Captain Donnelly returned, his expression revealing both pride and a hint of regret. "I take it you'll be leaving us," he said, having clearly been informed of the Admiral's intentions beforehand. "Expanding the work we started here," Marcus corrected, "and I'll need allies in key positions." Donnelly smiled, understanding the implication. "Count me in, whatever capacity serves the mission." The Trident ceremony itself embodied the integration of tradition and innovation that had characterized Marcus's approach to resilience training. The formal elements remained unchanged: the disciplined formation, the solemn presentation of the SEAL insignia, the dignified recognition of extraordinary achievement. But the underlying meaning had been subtly transformed by the graduates' experience in Marcus's program. These new operators had been trained not just in tactical proficiency, but in psychological awareness, not just in physical toughness, but in ethical clarity. They had learned from veterans who had faced both operational crises and personal breakdowns, who had discovered that true strength often emerges most powerfully from moments of greatest vulnerability. As Marcus moved along the formation, presenting each graduate with the trident that symbolized their entry into the SEAL community, he recognized in their eyes a quality that transcended mere pride or accomplishment, a depth of understanding about the path they had chosen, both its potential, glory, and its inevitable costs. When he reached candidate James Merrick, their exchange carried particular significance. Merrick had been the young man who had asked the pivotal question during Marcus's first address to the class: "How do you know when it's time to seek help instead of trying to handle everything alone?" That question had sparked an ongoing dialogue between them, with Merrick becoming something of an informal protégé, a promising operator whose natural leadership was enhanced rather than diminished by his willingness to acknowledge vulnerability. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.